I'm Dylan Stevens, and I set up the website for Dr. Barbara Thiering, who had a few published books that were very popular. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Pesher of Christ, and it tells the true story of Jesus and his church. It tells the story from the very beginning and towards the end after he died. And I thought that I would want to bring it to YouTube. It might be more accessible that way. Section 5, March 33 A.D., month before the Last Supper. Chapter 39, February 33 A.D., upon the rock of Peter, James and John in glory. Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you think I am?" Peter says, "You are the Christ, the anointed one of David, the Son of the living God, thus the Messiah of Israel under the Father, the Messiah of Aaron." Jesus says, "Rightly spoken, you are Petros, and upon this Petra I will build my church." The disciples begin to argue amongst themselves, being envious of Peter. Helena asks, "Since you have promoted Peter, can my stepsons James and John sit on your right hand and on your left hand to sit in your glory?" Jesus says, "You are all confused. I only used a generous parallelism. For instance, Solomon's Song 2:12. Blossoms appear on the earth. The time of Esmer has arrived. The voice of the turtle dove is heard in the land. Esmer has two meanings. That of pruning belongs to the first phase, and that of singing belongs to the last. And thus you are Petros, Peter, firstborn, and upon this Petra I will build my church." I used the double meaning of Petra. My meaning is that my church will be built on a firm foundation. It is not to be one person, for all my disciples share equally in it. Peter says, "So am I your rock then?" Jesus is frustrated. So be it. Chapter 40, March 33 A.D., Judas and the 30 pieces of silver. At the Sanhedrin, Caiaphas speaks. Clearly Jesus has convicted himself by aiding Simon Magus. Now we have two that would be better off dead. Maybe we can get Pilate to crucify them as enemies of Rome. Nicodemus stands to leave. Pilate will never come to Qumran. It is absurd. And turning to Joseph of Arimathea, "Are you following me?" James stays. Judas Iscariot enters and speaks. On Thursday, Jesus and Simon will be at Qumran, the pure Jerusalem in exile for the sacred supper. It is a day early for the Passover because Jesus intends to go to the monastery on the next day, and also less risk of being found out. I can leave the sacred supper early and alert the temple guards and lead them to Jesus and Simon. At midnight they will be in the Garden of Gethsemane, where they can be arrested and tried by your council before dawn on the day of Passover, ready to be tried by Pilate. Caiaphas says, "Yes, we could entice Pilate by offering him Simon and pretend to offer Nicodemus, who is really Theudas Barabbas, who is wanted by Pilate, having been responsible for the recent riot that resulted in Roman deaths. Then we can trade Jesus for Barabbas. If Pilate leaves at morning light by horseback, he can be in Qumran by morning." Judas says, "I do not ask for a reward of treasure, just to have John the Baptist's position as the silver moon cycle of 30 members." Caiaphas says, "It is yours." Chapter 41, March 33 A.D., Jesus rides a donkey into Jerusalem. Agrippa, stopping Jesus at the queen's house, says, "As you know, I intend to be a king over the kingdom of Herod the Great. I've been advised in 1st and 2nd Kings. David had his son Solomon ride on a donkey up to Jerusalem. I want to reenact that pageant in hopes to further my goal. It is the Qumran followers that I need to impress. Jesus says, I have no desire to be a king such as David. My subjects are of the spirit, not of the earth. Agrippa says, you can have their spirits, but it is their adulation that I seek. You should be glad that I am willing to share it with you. I have procured a young donkey colt for you to ride with me. Jesus says, I'm sorry, but I must refuse. Agrippa says, you need to take this as a command, or perhaps you should ask John the Baptist's head about the power of my command. So you were responsible for his death. Agrippa mounts the donkey and Jesus the colt. As they ride, the people throw palm leaves and cloaks in their path. When they dismount, Jesus disappears into the crowd. Chapter 42, March 33 A.D. Mary Magdalene announces their child. At the house of Simon, Lazarus, Helena, Martha, and Jesus are seated. Magdalene stands in front of Jesus saying, remember the second time we tried for a child in November 31 A.D., when Helena said, I should be helping out rather than sulking, and now it is 3 months from last December, and this was the last time that it would be allowed. Magdalene kneels at Jesus' feet and begins to wash his feet and anoint them with spikenard from an alabaster jar, using her headscarf. Then after a time she looks up to Jesus, saying, Are you surprised yet? Jesus says, Oh, holy God, you are carrying our child, aren't you? Yes, my teacher. She stands exposing her belly, and Jesus kisses her belly, saying, Hello, my little Jesus. Judas mutters, What a waste of precious ointment. Section 6, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., Thursday, April 2nd, 33 A.D. The Last Supper, Sacrament 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. This is the last Passover, number 4. In Matthew 26:2, you have known that after 2 days the Passover takes place, and the Son of Man is delivered to be crucified. Mark 14:1, and the Passover and the unleavened food were after 2 days. Luke 22:1, and the feast of the unleavened food was coming near, that is called the Passover. John 11:53, and the Jewish Passover was near. The upper room of the Last Supper at Qumran was in the north area of the vestry. It was raised from the lower section, at the step at row 13. Laid out on the floor was an imagined heavenly man-woman, complete with eyes, ears, breast, chest, belly, womb, and stones testicles. It was numbered in rows starting at the bottom of row 18, called the sea, where there was a door. Then up to row 13, where there was a step called the earth, up to a raised area. Each square is a cubit, the length of an arm. The table was assembled in 2 rows, 8 and 9. There were 6 seats on each side. The lower side, row 10, the upper side, row 7. Row 6, the 2 leaders, Simon and Jonathan. Row 5. Herod King is supposedly to be like God. Herod the Great, the Tetrarchs, Archelaus, Antipas, Philip, Herod Agrippa, 1 and 2. The upper floor held up by 2 pillars would be where the leaders would stand on row 7 and 6 and 5. But for the purposes of the Holy Supper, they used the lower floor. Chapter 43a, Thursday, April 2nd, 33 A.D. Finding the location. Jesus sends forth 2 of his disciples and says to them, Go to the city, there meet with a man bearing a pitcher of water. He will show you a large upper room. furnished and prepared. Jesus says to the twins James and John, "This being our last Passover together before I enter the monastery, we should all spend it together. We need to do it in secret because Caiaphas will be looking to arrest Simon and me, and obviously we cannot invite Herod Antipas to be the king position, or it will be John the Baptist all over again." John Aquila says, "Will Simon be there?" "Yes, he told me he would meet us in disguise as the man with the water jar." Aquarius, position 11 in the disciples list. Since Simon is an initiate, having been excommunicated as Lazarus, I will be taking his position, and Joses will take my position as crown prince. Ever since the pool of Bethesda, I have distrusted my unjust brother James. James Niceta says, "I will check, but the vestry area at Qumran should be available on our Passover, since it will be the day before the Pharisees' one." The 13 are welcomed by the man with the water jar. Chapter 43b, Thursday, April 2nd, 33 AD, 6 p.m. Washing the feet of the disciples. John 13, 1, 3-6, 8. And before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing his hour had come, that he may remove out of the world unto the Father, that is, returning to the monastery, having loved his own who are in the world, knowing that all the things Father Jonathan had given to him into his hands, and from God in the monastery he came forth, and unto God he goes, does rise from supper, and lays down his garments, and having taken a towel, girded himself. Afterwards he puts water into a basin, and began to wash the feet of the disciples, and wipe with the towel with which he was girded. Coming to Peter, who says, "You may not wash my feet until the age, the restoration." Jesus answered him, "If I may not wash you, you will have no part with me." The other disciples moved their chairs closer to be washed. Chapter 43c, Thursday, April 2nd, 33 AD, 8 p.m. The Sacrament. The holy table has been prepared. Jesus and the disciples are sitting in the raised section of the vestry. Jesus says, in preparing for the promised restoration, I will act as Moses, who spoke to the I Am, Yahweh, in the burning bush. I affirm to you, my disciples, the sent ones, that you also have received the promise from I Am through me. Having taken their seats, Jesus and Father Jonathan each break off 1/6 of his half loaf, as Jesus says, I am the bread of life, so that he who is coming unto me may not hunger, and my blood in the wine is so you will not thirst, and have eternal life in the resurrection. And now I beside give the rest of the loaf to Judas, and my cup to distribute to the right of him. Jesus takes 1/6, dips it in the cup, and passes it to Thaddeus, then abruptly leaves. All are astonished. Jesus says, let us bring this ceremony to conclusion with all haste. Thaddeus, who has temporarily moved over to Judas's seat as Jesus' assistant, reaches across Peter, who gives to James, and John, who walks around to Simon. Father Jonathan completes his side to Joses, who gives to Matthew, who reaches across to John Mark and gives to Philip and Andrew, then around to Thomas, and they sing a hymn. Chapter 43d, Thursday, April 2nd, 33 AD, 9 p.m. Musical chairs at discussion time. Thomas says, since Judas is in charge of the church money, did he go out to get supplies for the poor outside? Simon says, there is treachery here. Leaving is forbidden, not even for the salt latrine. The disciples start to squabble amongst themselves as to where they would be reseated. Thaddeus says, "Since Judas gave me the loaf, can I stay in Judas's seat?" Jesus disagrees. "No, that should be one of my two swords of the Garden of Eden, Peter or John Mark." John Mark says, "Should it be me as the stand-in for Magdalene at the female bosom square?" Peter says, "Should it be me at the male breast square who declared you to be the Christ?" Jesus says, "Jonathan, can Thaddeus take my usual position?" He nods. Jesus says, "Here is my final seating plan. Thaddeus will move over below Jonathan. Peter will sit in Judas's seat below me, with John Mark to his right. John Niceter and John Aquila will move to their right, opening up a seat for Joses. James is then opposite Peter. Philip and Andrew will move to their left, Philip opposite Thaddeus. I, Jesus, represents the kingdom. Jonathan represents the power. Peter and Thaddeus share in the glory. Let us quiet down and be reseated for my sermon, Loving Your Enemies. Chapter 43e, Thursday, April 2nd, 33 AD, 9:45 p.m. The cock will crow twice. 3 hours denied, 12 midnight equals 3 a.m. Jesus says, "It is now time for discussion. As you know, I have conceived a child and will be returning to monastery. Since you will not be able to see me very often, I want to expand the first commandment that I gave you. I bid you love one another as I love you." Philip says, "We wish we could kiss you always in the marriage of Christ." Peter says, "Let me follow you even into monastery." Jesus replied, "Not while you are married." And Peter, "Let me tell you, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me thrice." Peter says, "I catch your humor, Master. It is not my fault. As the cock crow for 3 in the morning, when midnight is called, I will immediately call the hour of 3, stealing 3 hours. Next is section 7, 10 p.m. Thursday to 9:15 a.m. Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. Counterplot, arrest and trial.